and welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast with me, Janet Hitchen, and with my co-host over in Iceland, Mike Klein. We've got a fantastic guest for you today, Francisco Marin. Francisco is the founder and CEO of Cognitive Talent Solutions, a Palo Alto-based company specializing in AI-powered organizational network analysis. It's quite the mouthful. He's also a founding member of the Network-First Manifesto, a global initiative advocating for a shift from rigid hierarchies to network-based models of work. He has over a decade of experience in AI and people analytics. He's a former business analytics leader from IBM, where he implemented AI-powered stuff. I don't have what you implemented. AI-powered things, solutions, ideas. He's originally from Cordoba, Spain, and is currently based in Palo Alto, California. Welcome to the podcast, Francisco.
Welcome, Francisco.
Thank you both for having me today. Glad to
You're
be here.
very welcome. Mike, do you want to kick off with the questions?
Yeah, let me just kick off kind of with a bit of context. I mean, one of the things that I've been talking about in the world of internal communication for years has been about identifying influencers in organizations, understanding the hidden networks. Basically, what Francisco does and what he's talking about is not only doing this, but doing this with a certain degree of scale, speed, and resilience in a way that has not been possible up to this point. And in doing so, he's also gotten a lot of kind of theoretical and contextual understanding of what this could do, why it's important, and why it's feasible, really why it's a feasible next step, as we look at the future of work and the future of organizations. Does that summarize, at least does that kick us off at all from that perspective, Francisco?
Yes, I agree. I'm very passionate about organizational network analysis. I'm very passionate about networks. And I believe that this is a methodology that has profound implications for the future of work, which is what we are exploring through the Network-First Manifesto initiative.
So just to kick off the questions, let's start with the very basics for our audience, because this is a field that, because it's so rich, it has a lot of its own jargon. So one of the things I'd like to do is try to de-jargonize it for the people who are listening to us. What is organizational network analysis, and why do you think communication professionals should care about it?
Sure. So organizational network analysis, which as Janet pointed, is a bit of a mouthful, right? So it's also known as ONA, which is a bit easier to remember. And it's basically a people analytics methodology that allows us to analyze and visualize the informal interactions that exist within an organization. And we can do this through active data sources like online surveys, or we can do it through passive data sources like aggregated metadata from email, calendar, or video conference tools. And that way we can map the network of informal collaboration within a company and do things like identifying informal leaders and hidden influencers, identifying organizational silos and bottlenecks, or even deploy a series of micro interventions through AI agents to achieve specific outcomes, covering use cases like change management, leadership development, onboarding, or internal communication.
It feels, I'm just going to, I read something, I'm always reading something, and I read something, I think it was last year in the FT, so the Financial Times, and they had this absolutely beautiful, the original org chart. And the original org chart wasn't hierarchical. The original org chart looked like ONA. So it looked like that network analysis with, it wasn't the boss at the top. It was people who had very specific skill sets who were in the middle. And this thing was beautifully designed and drawn. And I think it came from the railways, when the railways first started to kind of push out. And someone said, we kind of need to figure out who's doing what and how that all works. Are we kind of heading back to the 19th century and those original ideas of let's kill hierarchy and actually let's look at how companies actually work? Is that what we're doing?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think that every time that you work with disruptive technology, it's you go through a journey where the basic way to understand how to shape the future is to understand where we come from. And sometimes
Yeah.
in that journey of understanding where we come from, you discover actually that things haven't been the way that you thought they were,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
actually what we experience as being standard or normal or the status quo is actually an iteration of a particular uh, view of the world
Okay.
or approach that actually can be reversed in a way or reiterated, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, I was not aware of this particular article. Please share it with me. But
I'll send it to you. It's
yeah,
fantastic.
but I am aware that even despite not having access to technology, there are different organizations that have manually tried to map the network of informal interaction, sometimes by just asking people or based on intuition. And that typically
Yeah.
looks like more of an organic chart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's. I mean, trying to do that manually. I'm just thinking, if you're in an organization, as soon as you kind of hit a certain number, manually doing that becomes almost like an Everest-style task.
Yeah.
It's
You can
huge.
manually find out who your influencers are. I've done this on a number of occasions for organizations, but you can't manually map them. That's
Yeah, just to
well
map the whole
beyond
thing. Yeah.
the capabilities of the human mind and, probably of most graphics packages as well. And that's one of the things that turned me on about ONA when I heard about it 15 years ago. Was its ability not just to identify who the key people were, but to produce visually compelling maps about, where do these people sit. They kind of look like airline route maps. They look like the map or the graphic that's behind you, where you've got, a small number of dots which have a lot of traffic coming off of them, and then lots of other people connecting into those what are called hubs in ONA speak, but the people who really drive the conversations. The best statistic being that 3% of the people drive 90% of the conversations. That's the stat from Intervisors, which is a firm that operates in that space. Janet, you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to say, so Francisco, kind of coming back to the second part of that question that Mike originally asked, why should communication, we kind of know, I think Mike and I are sort of aware, but how would you say, why do communication professionals need to care about this?
Well, that's a great question. When working in internal communication, one of the goals is how to ensure that internal communications are as effectively dispersed as possible, right? And that we receive as little friction as possible and the process is as smooth as possible, right? And
Yeah.
a big part of that basically is taking into consideration the informal reality of the organization. So again, nowadays, when we look at a traditional organizational chart, we'll see people in different roles, different reporting lines, but there is a whole informal reality that operates parallel to that, where there are people that are perceived as informal leaders or hidden influencers based on basically how they share information, how people go to them when they need technical support or personal support, or based on just pure inspiration, right? There are people that because of their charisma or because of other factors, they're perceived as a role model within the organization. And this often is not related to role or experience, but it's just based on genuine human connection. So if we ignore that reality, it might happen first that when we try to position a certain message in the organization, first, the informal leaders that exist in the organization, if they don't feel aligned with that message, they might use their influence to create friction against that message or change, right? And we're also missing a huge opportunity, because if we can get those informal leaders to become early adopters of whatever message or change we want to push in the organization, as Mike was mentioning earlier, right? There is research in the industry from Intervisor that shows that 3% of informal leaders can influence up to 85% of the remaining population. Our own research at Cognitive Talent Solutions shows that you can accelerate change adoption by up to 70%. And I think this should be just a best practice across internal communications as well as any other industry, basically, that works with people on a regular basis.
Are you finding that it is, or are you finding that is it a struggle to have this conversation with internal communication professionals, or are you finding that actually they are willing and really want to kind of understand this better and figure out how to adopt this in their organizations?
To be honest with you, historically, the main stakeholder for active organizational network analysis, which is survey-based, was the HR department, particularly people analytics. And for passive O&A, which relies on metadata from tools like Office 365 or Gmail, typically it was more of an IT discussion. Now, with internal communication, I find that it is a community, it is a function that naturally understands the potential of this methodology much better than other communities. But it's ultimately it's all about documenting case studies, documenting success stories, collaborating with thought leaders like yourself, right, to spread the word and make it more visible. But I found, compared to other functions within the organization, we haven't really have such a deeper dive as we had with IT or HR people analytics.
So it almost sounds as if there's an opportunity here for communication teams, or if it's a communication team who is really tiny and thinks we don't have the budget, and they can think of all the blockers and the reasons not to. There's almost an opportunity here to go and have some of these conversations and understand this and go talk to your IT department or go talk to your HR department and say, hey, what are you doing about this? I'm interested in this. Can you help? To see if you can actually ride the wave or piggyback on their budget to be able to get access to some of this data that would be,
exactly
3%, 70%, 3%, 85%, whichever your percentage is, it's a huge difference. So if you can go partner or collaborate with one of those other groups within your organization who may be looking into this for another reason, you could just, as a byproduct, hey, we've just got some really fantastic insights and data that we could start playing with.
And even sometimes the case we have is that there are O&A initiatives that are owned by HR, but the champion or the sponsor of the initiative is outside of HR. As for example, is in operations or is an executive from a different department, right?
Yeah.
And these are a challenge for HR because sometimes the HR professional have to learn to work on initiatives in collaboration with other business groups, right? And align these projects with strategic imperatives within the organization. But I find that internal communication is one of those functions, at least based on the conversations I've had so far, that this really resonates with them because they maybe internal communication executives, they understand very intuitively the importance of informal leadership and the importance of the resistance that can be created by those informal leaders when they are not engaged. So I think there is a very natural and organic use case there. Again, like I look at this like this should be something that should be considered by default when working on any type of internal communication initiative. And we're trying to just raise awareness, and part of that is documenting case studies. Part of that is raising awareness through initiatives like the Network-First Manifesto, more from a collaborative freedom and future of work perspective. Part of that as well is integrating this natively into platforms like Google and ServiceNow, so that when internal communication executives and other professionals, they work with their default platforms, they can find already some capabilities.
They've got it. Yeah.
I mean, there's another piece of this as well from a future work perspective, which is not only do we get to find out how to engage people in a way that communication is more efficient and effective right now, but as we look to the personnel changes that are going to happen, particularly in knowledge organizations as a result of AI, if you're making these personnel decisions without an understanding of how the networks work, you may end up destroying your organization in the process effectively if you end up annihilating your entire or a large section of your informal leadership without any regard for, having mechanisms in place to fix it. You could be causing yourself much bigger problems than just, the sheer problem of doing AI-driven layoffs or things like that. One of the things that comes up in my conversations about this type of approach, about ONA, about, identifying internal influencers, is that there's a common refrain about, oh, we can't do this because of GDPR. We can't do this because of legal. And in fact, you mentioned during our pre-call that one of the reasons why the Network-First Manifesto came into being was to try to put some collective thinking around these legal issues. What would you say to a head of legal or a head of IT or a head of HR who doesn't want to do this because the legal issues are an excuse or they have genuine concern about the legal issues?
Yeah, definitely. The regulatory frameworks in terms of data privacy and data security of each region, they're a big factor when it comes to the adoption of these type of methodologies, right? Because we're dealing with people data, we're dealing with names, we're dealing with emails, and it's not only these frameworks are important, but also there are differences at cultural level in specific countries. For example, within Europe, most countries, they are much more careful with data privacy or data security as a result of GDPR than, for example, the United States or Latin America or sometimes Asia, right? But specifically within Europe, running a project in Spain is totally different than running it in Germany or Switzerland, right? Because culturally, the way that they adopt GDPR is much more comprehensive, right? So there are differences even at country level. But in general, within the GDPR framework, which sometimes is actually at CTS, the one that we take as a baseline to operate at global level because it's the most exigent, it's just about having a few best practices in mind. So first of all, when running this type of initiatives, whether it is active ONA based on online service or passive ONA based on aggregating metadata from email, in calendar, and video conference, we have to communicate the purpose of the initiative, right? We have to communicate that this is happening and communicate the purpose of it in a clear and concise manner. And this goes a long way in getting employee buy-in. For example, when we do active ONA, we position it as an opportunity for people to recognize the value that their peers provide to them on a day-to-day basis, right?
Nice.
So really focus on the positive connotation. Then, it's very important when, for example, launching the survey, that the employees provide their explicit consent to participate in the survey. Make it easier for them to revoke that consent at any time by sending an email to a certain contact, and also have basically an internal contact so they can solve any doubts at any time. It can be a data protection officer or the HR department. And then if you respect those basic principles, like you adhere 100% to GDPR. On the passive ONA side, it's a little bit trickier. And because technically, it's operationally is really, really difficult to get the consent from the explicit consent from all the users being analyzed because of the nature of the data, and because it involves all people in the organization, and also because it's data that is dynamic, it's changing on a regular basis, right? So the approach that we recommend at CTS is to perform passive ONA at aggregate level, meaning analyzing groups of 5 or more people, not less than 5 people. Although in some organizations with small department, they can lower it to 3, but definitely we should not go below 3. And also we recommend not accessing the content of the communications, only the metadata. And if you respect those 2 best practices, aggregate level and not analyzing the content, really that mitigates most of the concerns. In any case, it's always easier if companies start with active ONA, running the survey, and then in a subsequent project, they integrate passive data sources, because just the conversation around email communication is it's sensitive. And that's why from CTS, we're in the direction of building the native capabilities for organizational network analysis of companies like Google, because the fact that they already own the email data, it automatically mitigates many of those concerns.
Okay. So there's almost a sense that you start with the very obvious case, and then you can sort of, once people actually understand, oh, this is what it's being used for, this is how we're doing this is the sort of stuff that we can see coming out of this, these are some of the benefits that we're getting, actually it then becomes easier to sort of introduce the passive stuff.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
I
No,
would
that
not recommend to any company unless really there is a business imperative that really justify there is a very mature organization. I would not recommend starting with passive O&A without using active O&A, because
yeah.
even if sometimes the champion might have the impression that by not having to run a survey, that's going to mitigate many concerns and it's going to be the internal sales process faster. But in reality, because the conversation around email communication is very sensitive, it is only once the company has experienced active O&A that then they are in a
Yeah.
position to really feel more comfortable integrating passive data sources.
Yeah. No,
There's also
that
some
makes
other
sense.
problems with passive O&A as well, which is that, a lot of email conversation, a lot of transactional conversations don't have much to do with influence at all. They have to do with, routine processes like, is the mailbox, is the vacation mailbox at HR the most influential person in the organization? Probably not, but it's probably the one that gets the most traffic, for instance.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can control for that for an extent, but, certainly active O&A, actually people saying who they go to, is going to be a lot more salient than, email flows, which are perhaps a bit more transactional than cultural or communicational.
Yeah, there are ways to filter out the noise through algorithms. Like as you say, for example, automated notifications, right? From an account that is not human. But what is important to understand is, like, ultimately the ideal situation is to have a combination of active and passive data sources, because
Yeah.
first, they serve different use cases. When we work with passive O&A, there are use cases like employee burnout, for example, turnover risk, absenteeism risk, or just identifying like high-level trends, silos, and bottlenecks at organizational level that passive O&A does very effectively. But many of the actionable use cases are focused on the identification of informal leaders and leveraging them as early adopters, as change agents, as internal champions, as high potential employees, as bodies of new hires. And that's why, even if we were able to perform passive O&A at individual level, which would involve many risks from a data privacy and data security perspective, even that information would not be actionable enough to identify informal influencers, because the fact that you are sending or receiving many emails on a regular basis, or the fact that you're having many meetings with your peers, does not imply that they might respect you informally. And there are some interactions when we go, and take a coffee with a person or go for lunch, that is not captured through email, calendar, or video conference. So that's where the combination of active and passive O&A is the ideal scenario, because passive O&A shows us what employees do, but active O&A shows us how employees feel. And it's really a combination also from aggregate level and individual level that provide these actionable insights.
I'm really interested in the fact that you just said it can also help identify burnout, because I hadn't really thought about it like that. But yes, if you've got somebody who is the crux of something and if you can see physically the number of different strands that are coming into that person and the number of networks that they are holding together, there is a distinct possibility, I suppose, that that person could be overwhelmed, have too much on their plate, have too many plates spinning.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective. I thought, as you say, I thought about it as, these are the people who could be your influencers. They're going to be able to, these are the people you can go talk to get additional information. But by doing that, you're adding more weight to what they're doing. You're adding more plates for them to spin, which then actually also does become harder for that person. So there's almost a sense of, you are an overachiever, you're a high achiever, you've got this you created this role for yourself. Now you could be at risk of burnout. Have you seen organizations specifically use it for that? Or does it tend to be more around the influence, or are we looking at actually protecting individuals?
No, that's a great use case. And it's one of those use cases where it offers the possibility to combine aggregate level passive O&A with individual level active O&A. Because as you said, basically when a person is an informal leader and is interacting with a high number of peers on a regular basis, that might result in burnout. That's the concept of what Rob Cross called a collaborative overload, right?
Okay.
I have my views at personal level on that particular use case, because I think it's very dangerous when the O&A consultant or the HR department decides to be in a position of like deciding how much is too much collaboration or too little collaboration. I'm more of an advocate of observing what's happening organically in the organization and just trying to align our strategic imperatives, trying to align our decisions based on that, what is happening. But in the moment that you start deciding how people should be collaborating, you lose the organic component, right?
Got it.
Now, specifically for burnout risk, on the passive O&A side, we can look at metrics like the percentage of collaboration outside working hours, which is a huge factor in employee burnout. Why? Because let's put an example. Let's say you work from 9 to 5, but now you happen to have a meeting at 10 p.m., right? Now, mentally, you do not disconnect from the work mentality until 10 p.m., even if you're not doing anything between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m., right? So that contributes to that.
And then you don't disconnect until at least 1 a.m. because you have 1 hour of meeting and then you're still churning the meeting.
You're still thinking about it.
Been there.
Exactly. Or even you might not have to have a meeting, but just the fact that you have to check on your mobile to see if there is an email coming, right, or some notification, that contributes to that always on mentality that increase burnout. The other aspect of it is like when we look at things like the email sent, emails received, meetings attended, it's very difficult, even inappropriate, to compare the activity of different departments, because the work that is being done in sales is very different than the work that is done in marketing or internal communication or HR, right? So the way that we do it at CTS, for example, is we compare the level of activity versus the baseline of the same team. So if within your team of internal communications, you're used to send, for example, 20 emails a day, and all of a sudden you shift to 50 or 100 emails a day, that's a situation where you are likely to experience burnout, because you are working with a level of activity that is much higher than your own average. But that might be completely different in a separate department where they send many
100%.
emails. They are not complex emails. They are very fast. They are administrative. Maybe there are departments that send just 2 or 3 emails, but they are incredibly complex and require a lot of work. So the contextualization is very important there. And now, if you combine the two of them, you have a person that happens to be an informal leader with many connections in a department that is working 40% more hours, outside working hours than the rest of the organization, and they have experienced an increase of 50% in their own baseline. That's where you can put all that information together to infer that a person might be experiencing burnout.
I just love the fact that we're able to look at data to start to understand how burnout could happen and who could be at risk potentially, and looking at it from not from a, hey, I need to give you less work, but from a, oh, there is a potential that there's a challenge here, and actually maybe there's better conversations that can be had or support that can be given, all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking of very specific examples personally that I've had myself, or that I know friends who've had, and where, as you say, things that sort of, the 10 o'clock call, or the 10 o'clock text message when you're in bed and you're asleep, and because your boundaries are down, you respond, and therefore you know that you're on a treadmill, and it's really difficult. So it's interesting to hear that from not just from a feeling perspective, which we've often heard, but actually from a data perspective, and that there's data that you can provide organizations with to say, hey, maybe you need to look out for your team members, or hey, maybe these team members might need some support.
100%. And also what is very important to understand, this is something that we are seeing not only in organizational network analysis, but even in other areas like quantum computing or other technological advancements, right? We're going towards systems where sometimes we don't fully understand at atomic level what is it that we are capturing. For example, we are not able to reverse engineer 100% what creates a genuine human connection between two individuals, right? There might be aspects that have to do with race, gender, ethnicity, role, the context of the work, previous like child memories. There can be so many factors that it's really not possible right now to fully understand it. But it's something that is observable and repeatable enough that you can build a whole system around it. So you start really with mapping genuine human connection and informal leadership. From there, you can really produce a series of metrics. This is what we call social capital metrics, right? That let you know basically all that network of relationships that you build in your organization as a result of working there on a regular basis. And that complements human capital metrics, which is what traditionally has been used for decision making, where basically it's things like the role where you work at, academic background, level of experience, attributes that are directly observable. So it's all about balancing human and social capital. And the funny thing with quantum computing happens kind of like the same, because even scientists do not fully understand at atomic level why particles behave sometimes as matter and sometimes as light, but it's something that is observable and repeatable enough so they can build a whole computing system on top of it, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's important to explain this, because one of the questions that we often receive is, oh, but isn't this data subjective? Isn't this aren't these responses just based on the opinion of individuals? And the answer is yes. It's because informal leadership is a subjective perception. But what we're doing here basically is decentralizing that feedback in a way that everyone in the organization can give their opinion about everyone in the organization. So that way, when you identify a person that being in the same role and being with the same level of experience than another person happens to have 200 more nominations because of technical support, personal support, inspiration, sharing information, there is something that is happening there that we have to address, right? That person, despite having a similar role and level of experience, perceived in a completely different way by their peers.
Well, you were talking about, particularly going back to the burnout example, you were talking about identifying a situation where you could correct an imbalance or, an excessive activity or an excessive just something that was excessive in the system. And at the same time, you also talked earlier about micro interventions where AI can come in and take, suggest particular actions, or even take some of those, those actions on its own initiative, or, because it's been programmed to do so. Talk a little bit more about how ONA can drive highly targeted micro interventions.
Sure. So this is a fascinating topic, because this is really the next wave of technology with generative AI and AI agents, and is really what enables organizational network analysis to show its full potential as kind of like the infrastructure of the future of work, in my opinion, right? So for those members of the audience that are not familiar with agentic AI or AI agents, right? The way they work basically is that, as the name indicates, they have agency to make certain decisions. So what we do basically is to automate traditional processes that have been highly complex, but in a way where the AI can understand the context of the situation and implement actual actions. So I'm going to give an example with onboarding. This is one of the use cases that have been, like most actionable so far with agentic AI and organizational network analysis. So here, traditionally, what we would do basically is to say, well, based on these algorithms, this particular person is positioned as the best person to be the mentor or buddy of this new hire, who happens to be for less than 12 months in the organization.
Okay.
We used to put that information at the disposal of the company, and then the manager or the HR department had to do internal work to match these people. In reality, what happened is that, maybe they did it like 4 or 5 times, but it was very difficult for them to do it in a scalable way on a regular basis, because it involved a lot of manual work, right? So now with agentic AI, it's very interesting, because when the new hire joins the organization, the AI can automatically identify who is the person that is best positioned to be their mentor or buddy, based on many different factors: informal influence, role, department, level of experience, and others. And then this shows up as an intervention on the platform ONA platform where the HR practitioner or the internal communication executive or the person that is in charge of the platform just have to authorize, just one click, have to authorize the intervention. And then the AI goes and first gathers the consent of the body to participate in the mentorship opportunity, informs the first liner. And once the body provides the consent, it makes an email introduction between the body and the new hire, schedules a meeting so they get to know each other. Once the meeting has taken place, it gathers their feedback, and it also measures the impact of shortening the time to productivity of the new hire. So there you have like 9 to 10 different actions that the AI can take automatically, and all what it takes is just a click authorizing the intervention from the HR department. And we have to include that click because of GDPR, because like still the regulation doesn't allow.
Yeah, you have to confirm that you are okay, et cetera, yeah.
But the reality is that here where we are looking at the organization of the future in our vision is really just a informal network of collaboration where AI agents deploy macro interventions on a regular basis, and a system that incentivizes genuine human connection and collaborative freedom. That ties more to what we do with the Network-First Manifesto, but specifically for internal communication executives, it's very important to be able, for example, when you're drafting a communication, to have a way to automatically get access to who are those informal leaders, and even, automate the way that those informal leaders might be onboarded into a certain initiative to become change agents, informing the first liner automatically. Even those small details go a long way, because otherwise, especially when operating with large organizations, this can imply a lot of manual work.
I'm just thinking, my brain kind of just initially went to a lot of people in comms always talk about approval processes, and how do you, if you're looking at something, how do you figure out who the approval process is for a specific project or a specific thing that you're doing? And if there was a way of automating the approval process, I think people would literally fly over to Palo Alto and give you a big kiss. I think they would be absolutely delighted if you could do something like that. It's kind of interesting here you talk about that would be a way of being able to do it, and how you can simplify some of those processes.
Well, that's a very important part, right? Because what we are seeing in companies that are adopting this successfully is that they typically lower the level of involvement of the manager from approving the involvement of the employee to being informed about it. So the ideal scenario, to make it like as smooth as possible, is for the change agent or, the body, the person that is at individual level is going to be involved in the opportunity, to receive the consent gathering email from the AI, and then having the manager being involved. If the manager feels very strongly about that person not being able to go there because of capacity, strategy, or other, that manager can always have a conversation right away with the employee. But if you establish as a first step that the manager has to give the approval and only then the employee has to be informed, that slows things down in a very significant way. So there has to be kind of like an agreement at company level that, hey, this is something that we want to bet on, and this is something that is important, right? To manage our social capital in a proactive manner. And sometimes it involves having the role of the manager go more into the role of a coach, or the concept of servant leader, which is playing in agile methodologies, right? And that's why as well, there is kind of like a combination of transitioning from rigid hierarchies to more network-based approaches, and leveraging not only human capital, but also a combination of social and human capital. Both things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Well, it's the implicate, if you think maybe 1 or 2 steps ahead of just simply the ability to deliver this, there's also some really interesting implications. For example, I could totally see how these agents could optimize an approval process, because ultimately they could decide who gets to be in the approval process. The challenge is if it makes a decision that somebody doesn't like, or that exposes the organization to some degree of legal or financial risk. It could have massive implications, not just from a failure perspective, but also questioning the value of this type of architecture inside of the organization. So there's, I think there's, and it's great that we're having this conversation, because these are the conversations that people need to be having about how much power do we give these tools, how much how much authority do we delegate, how much do we reserve. And you were also talking about how they could degenerate into something more sinister, like a social credit system, where where the system is grading the value of each employee based on the quality and the quantity of their interactions. I'm interested in, if you can elaborate both on,
Mhm.
what could happen and what safeguards could be put into place.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Because at the end of the day, networks are the most effective and efficient framework to understand and manage increasingly decentralized and automated environments, right? So networks and organizational network analysis as being a methodology that deals with networks, especially when combined with AI agents, it becomes way more powerful. It's just a technology. It's not intrinsically good or evil, but the more powerful it is, the more good can it do and the more evil it can do as well, right? So yeah, the same way that these network frameworks can amplify genuine human connection, collaborative freedom, and kind of like improve our employee experience in a way that we have never seen before. They can also contribute to creating really centralized systems that can exercise control at scale through social credit systems or through other frameworks that leverage social capital, right? Social capital is a very, very powerful, and we have seen already how through social networks they have already shaped the way that we operate on a regular basis. But if you think about it, like every single technology wave that has hit first Silicon Valley and then the rest of the world, it can be understood through the framework of the network. The internet is a network. Social media is a network. Blockchain is a network, and artificial intelligence is a neural network itself, right? So networks are not only embedded in the structure of these technologies, but also in the way that they show their potential. But it's so we don't know. The reality is that we don't know how the future of work is going to look like in 3-5 years from now. But I'm damn sure that networks are going to play a big role in it. And I think that we have now really like a period of 3 to 5 years to decide to collectively discuss what a new framework look like, because the problem with AI is that it amplifies whatever framework it touches. So the framework we operate with as organizations, as a society, is increasingly centralized and siloed. AI will amplify that. So it's about how can we leverage these few years before the advent of artificial general intelligence. This is what we call here in Silicon Valley the singularity, where AI is able to improve itself and it becomes way smarter than us. And then it kind of like gets out of control, right? Before we get there, how we can make sure at least that we operate with a framework, with a system that sets the right incentives so that AI can amplify that. And I wanted to touch very briefly as well on the concept of collaborative freedom, because it's one of the core concepts that we are touching in the Network-First Manifesto. Collaborative freedom means the ability to work on something you are passionate or interested in with people that inspire you and having freedom over your schedule, right? These are three things that look very basic, but people usually do not find them when they work in large multinationals. So as organizations, due to AI, get they shrink, they get smaller, they get more flat. Very important to design systems that set the incentives for people to experience a collaborative freedom at scale. And that's what we're trying to do with the Network-First Manifesto through organizational network analysis and through many other tools that are relevant in this context.
Let's take a step back and you've referred to the Network-First Manifesto on a number of occasions, but I think it would be useful to our listeners to hear more about the initiative itself, how it came to be, what its aims are, and how it's going about to make its aims become real in an increasingly volatile organizational and economic landscape.
Yeah, so sounds good. So really, the Network-First Manifesto initiative started as a conversation from between different practitioners in the ONA space about data privacy, data security, right? Best practices, especially for passive ONA. But it quickly evolved into something much more interesting and broader, in the regard that we had this collective conversation about what does it mean to be human? What is that makes us human that cannot be automated by AI within the next 3 to 5 years? And the collective answer that we had to that discussion was that what makes us human is our ability to connect with each other, to experience human connection, right? And then the question is, are we designing tools, systems, and frameworks that amplify human connection and collaborative freedom, or are we designing systems that limit that human connection and have a negative impact on our experience? Because if you ask anybody who is working in a large multinational where AI is disrupting the way they work, what they might tell you is that they do not have a better employee experience as a result of AI being adopted. They just have even a higher workload than before, and the organization is much smaller, right? But it's not necessarily making it easier for them to have a positive experience, to experience synergy with their peers, to be inspired by their peers, right? So then, like, what happened is that we created this manifesto with suggestions from many members of the community. And there were some people like Andras from Event 7 or Michael Arena from Connected Commons that were involved in that early process. And once we created that first version of the manifesto, then we did what we did is to basically start working based on the principles that we advocate for. So we mapped the areas of interest. We mapped the preferred project pairings and work style from all the members of the community. And we set up voluntary collaborative projects. So we've been running this 30-day challenge with 8 teams of 8 people working based on areas of interest to experience how that decentralized world looks like. And then another thing that we did is we deploy a blockchain-based tool where founding members can submit proposals on anything they want to happen in the initiative, right? And get the votes from other members. But the requirement there is that if you submit a proposal about a specific initiative and that reaches the quorum of 25 members, then you take the responsibility for leading that initiative, right? Engaging anybody in the organization that wants to be part of it, right? Or basically defining what is that you need to run the initiative. So then, say, for example, the other day, there was a person that submitted a proposal because they wanted to explore what the network-first approach means for inclusive collaboration across different cultures, right? So that person felt very, very strongly about that because it was the passion of her life, right? So then basically, she submitted the proposal and she defended it on the Slack workspace. She gathered the 25 votes of the quorum, and now basically there is a channel that is created on the Slack workspace where she leads the initiative. Anybody that is interested can join. At some point, she can decide to make it a private channel. But it's everything based on organic areas of interest, organic work style, and why I'm very interested in this. Where we are also now starting to add also a layer of organizational network analysis voted by the community. I'm very passionate about this because I see we're going towards a situation with society where many people, first of all, are becoming unemployed, right? Where, there are, I don't know in other countries, but here in Silicon Valley, entry-level jobs have been cut by about half, by 50%. Organizations are shrinking. And there is a lot of talented people out there that, they're becoming consultants, they're becoming entrepreneurs, that they just don't know what to do. And we need to offer, other than setting up a universal basic income, I think we need to offer a way for these people to experience meaningful connection and meaningful work, right? And again, this the Network-First Manifesto is a non-commercial initiative, it's community-led, it's open to all, but we are really doing like very cool experiments about how that future of work is looking like. And even in the first 3 months, we count with already 500 founding members, about 200 companies endorsing it. And this is a super eclectic and diverse community where we got doctors, internal communication professionals, HR practitioners, people analytics professional. This thing you see behind me is from a founding member. Actually, it's a textile called Roketsu, where they dye the textiles in a very specific way, right? And it's like a third generation Japanese business. So again, like super diverse community of founding members. And I really appreciate the support from both of you, really like raising awareness about this in the internal communications community, because we're getting like many internal communication professionals joining the Network-First Manifesto community. And this is something that I'm very passionate about, going about, I love O&A, but I'm very passionate about using networks to reimagine the future of work. So this is what I feel that I'm connecting with my passion.
I think it's really interesting because one of the things that Mike and I noticed, I think it was at the beginning of last year, Mike? Was it mid last year? It was sometime last year, I think, when we originally started the podcast. It might even have been this year. Time just goes a bit weird. But we had a conversation about how we were starting to see this kind of, and we called it Command and Control 2.0. And that there were quite a few leaders that were starting to say we saw an increase in return to office. Some of that's command and control, some of that's soft layoffs, some of that's for various other reasons that are sort of nefarious or whatever that might be. Because what you've described is something that is very egalitarian, there's a great deal of quality in what you're talking about, and the hierarchy disappears. Whereas what we're seeing in some other organizations is, I think Mike called it people, founders returning to founder mode. I get all the ideas. I have all the ideas. I tell you what I want you to go and do. You, my team, go and do it. But nobody is able to have great ideas and come up with those things. They're there to execute. They're not there to be sort of the genesis of ideas. So where does this fit with some of that stuff that we saw earlier this year or sort of late last year as this kind of command and control started to rise rear its head again? How do those two things play out?
So I look at the rising the command and control approaches as a way to kind of like admit that companies don't have the tools and resources to deal with the level of disruption they are experiencing, right? But I think it's perceiving at an intuitive level that by employees that organizations do not have the answers on how to deal with the current wave of change they're experiencing, right? That's why, there is a component of more egalitarian organization what we're discussing, but in the end there is leadership exists in nature. It's just there is informal leadership, not formal leadership. And again, like the Network-First Manifesto is not a initiative that advocates for anarchy or complete decentralization. We're just exploring the tension, the balance between centralization and decentralization, because that's where the magic happens, right? Yeah. And so far, I mean, what we are seeing, again, very early stage, but what we are seeing is that when you have a system where people understand that, they need to submit a proposal to get a certain quorum, they need to take responsibility for the ideas they submit in terms of leading the initiative. And it actually works, but it's also because people care about it. Right. The problem is when people do not care about things. And there are elements of it that have to do with entrepreneurship and with the founder role, in the regard that, founders, we are people that we care about what we do. Otherwise, we would not be able to develop enough resilience to go through the process of scaling a company. But it's about how can you combine your individual identity as an entrepreneur, as a founder, with your collective identity as member of a movement that aligns with your values. That's the shift in mentality that needs to happen, right? We cannot operate in isolation. We need to operate in connection, because this is one of the principles of the manifesto. What it says is that our brains are wired for human connection. We are social beings at our core, right? And we have to set up systems that align with that nature. But the challenge is, any organization right now that in the context of the wave of AI, it switches to a really strong command and control approach, is going to be able to kind of like in the very short term, maybe try to navigate the changes they are experiencing, but they know it, and the employees feel that this is not an approach that is going to work long term.
Yeah.
And when you look at the Gen Z, for example, 75% of Gen Z indicate that they would like to work as an entrepreneur, right? They really have a problem with the current system in the regard that they either do, quiet quitting or they demand that the companies have certain values or certain approaches. But a big part of this as well is, hey, how can we create a framework that is actually going to motivate all this new generation that is coming now into the workforce and that is indicating us that they are becoming disengaged? And for me, I'm a big believer in systems and systems setting the right incentives. I believe that humans are super resourceful and adaptive, and we will go to the limits of the system to test it, right? But at its core, it has to be a system that set the incentives to bring up the best of us and not the worst.
Well, one thing that comes up, though, when you're talking about, the level of enthusiasm people have, the level of participation, one of the challenges, and, certainly AI is in a position to, address some of these, is the amount of friction that's created when you have consensus, when you have, decentralized decision-making. To what extent can you strike a balance between the need for clarity and decision speed with the need to get the best degree of participation and the best data into those decisions? And that's something that you're looking at, right?
That's exactly what we're exploring, right? Because, again, we are trying to run the community in a way that every major decision is backed by a proposal that has reached quorum. But the reality is that as you implement those initiatives, there are nuances that need to be decided on the spot by an administrator. So say, for example, we voted to map the areas of interest, set up a Slack workspace, and set up collaborative projects, right? But now, as you go through that process, what is the size of the projects we should set? What is the number of projects we should set as a pilot? So we say, okay, let's do eight pilots of 8 members, and let's try it for 30 days. But I made that decision on the individual level as I was implementing this, right? So that's kind of where centralization meets decentralization, because otherwise, we would lose an additional month trying to gather 3 additional proposals. Now, I find that the setup that we are trying now of, a person submitting a proposal, gathering the votes, and then that person automatically having a channel on Slack where people can join and that initiative starts to unfold, that is very, very intuitive, right? But it's the concept of accountability. Accountability is very important there. And it's something that is missing sometimes in traditional corporate environments. Because when you don't care about something, you don't feel that you're accountable for that. But when you submit a proposal that is close to your heart, say, for example, this that I have behind, Roketsu, right? Might be something very niche and very specific, but for the person that is doing it, is the world, is his self-expression, right? So if that person submits a proposal about, this particular dyeing or that textile approach, they care so much about it that they're going to make sure that everything is implemented, and all those gaps that typically are filled by administration, they are filled by passion. And this is, it's about people caring about stuff. That's really, really important. And just the fact that highlights more examples of that, I'm really, really hopeful about this.
Well, that highlights also another massive issue that we're dealing with in organizations right now, is prioritization. That, even in the current paradigm, there's a lot of misalignment around organizational priorities, either because the organization has a misalignment between its stated priorities or its actual priorities, but also the extent to which managers and staff are pursuing their own priorities, often to the detriment of the organization's priorities. To what extent are you looking at prioritization as an engine, as a framework for creating coherence in all of this?
You see, the thing with prioritization is that it's intrinsically hierarchical, because setting priorities implies that there is a person in a higher position in the hierarchy that is deciding what is the option that another person in a lower person in the hierarchy should follow. When you are operating from in an environment of collaborative freedom, you are in charge of how many initiatives you want to pursue simultaneously, and how important they are to you. That's where one of the things that we are exploring as we grow this is the same way, for example, that you go to Airbnb and you're ready if you're a good host or a bad host, or or a good guest or a bad guest. Or the same way, for example, you open a restaurant and you have already decentralized feedback platform like TripAdvisor. There might be at some point the need to include some kind of like rating or kind of like feedback mechanism for people to assess how actually you are delivering in those initiatives, right? Because it should not count the same. Let's say, for example, if you're doing an initiative and your only goal is to commercialize your own product and you don't want to add any value, then if this is something really that you're passionate about, then you dedicate a lot of hours. But in the end, I don't find any other better approach to do that than through the feedback from the peers themselves, right? But again, all this starting, if there is only one person that is leading the initiative, that this is coming from a deep place in their heart and they're really passionate about it, that fills all the gaps. That fills things like having to deal with people that don't have the right intentions, having to deal with people that don't put enough work. If it comes from an authentic place, and we make it easier for you to do it in a way that you have an audience, that you have somebody you can share it with, that's 90% of the work already. Because the problem is that nowadays, a person might be very passionate about, say, for example, the labradorite stone, a passion of mine. I want to really work with something because I love this stone, right? Okay, but if you don't have an audience, if you don't have a group that really feels about it at least a certain way, how can you do? You cannot operate in isolation. But is that component of having a person, just a single one at least, that is passionate about it, with a group of people that idea resonates with them. Sometimes it doesn't have to be 100%, but it has to be enough to go into a channel and go to a meeting with these people. You will be surprised the magic that comes from that. Now, when we extrapolate that to how prioritization works in normal multinationals, it's a different process, because you see that the goal there is not to align you with what you're passionate about, not to align you with your freedom of schedule, with your preferred working style. Is what does the company need in a particular time, and what is the most efficient way to get to that goal? You as a person, you're just a tool in that process, right? The question is, can we get this new type of work to a level of scalability and efficiency and effectiveness that can somehow cover some of the stuff the multinationals are doing? I think that we are exploring that, but also we have to anticipate that we are going towards a future where AI is going to automate many of the non-value added activities that require a high level of coordination in terms of people doing administrative work, right? So that's a factor that is taking place there. So just to summarize, this is something that we are exploring in two different ways. One way is integrating this into multinationals and large companies as a set of principles, as a set of tools that they can kind of like bring the way they work to a certain direction of amplifying human connection, collaborative freedom, but then also in parallel, experimenting at atomic level, how that new environment look like and to what extent we can make it scalable. And we need to do both things.
I guess there's the third piece, which is how do you allocate capital? How do you accumulate resources? Because right now, in the voluntary model, the only resource you're allocating is time. And the only real driver of that time is the accountability of the project owner to deliver a tangible project based on their proposal. So the gap there is, how do you create a market for these outputs, and can that market either replace ultimately people might think this is difficult, but obviously with AI accelerating, it might not be as difficult as you think. Does it replace the work of multinationals and traditional companies, or does it simply just create a new startup market for collaborative enterprises, which then and then you can create some kind of league table about which of these collectives is the most effective and most interesting, and capital would flow to those, so to speak.
That's one of the key aspects of this, right? And I mean, to some extent, we are already experiencing the large multinationals to a great extent depend on the inorganic acquisition of small businesses, which in the end is like basically people that come together to work on something they're passionate about with their friends, right? And that already accounts for a huge part of the innovation that these large multinationals are able to drive despite having like billions of dollars in resources and hundreds of thousands of employees. So that already is telling you there is something in that organic approach that is driving value. However, I have my personal vision about how this can evolve, but in reality, we're just exploring it, right? For me, let's put an example here in California. Not many people know it, but there is actually a region north of San Francisco called Marin County, where concept of organic food actually being sold in a mall was invented actually. So it was the even though in LA was fully commercialized, it was in a place called Good Earth, which there was like only two places like Fairfax and Mill Valley, where they have these cooperative, right, of farmers and people that come together and they say, hey, we're going to bring the products from the farm, good quality, no pesticides, and we're going to remove many of the intermediaries that we need for supply management and modifying industrial. Is the way approaching, there are only two places, but it's like the quality is incredible compared to what you find in other supermarkets, right? So I would like to imagine a future of work where, say, you go, for example, to order a coffee, but that coffee shop is actually a group of people that are passionate about coffee, that they have come together and create an experience that is really important for them. If we can make that scalable enough so that people can at least organize at time zone level, at region level, based on language preferences, it doesn't need to be like a single initiative taking over the whole world, but it could be sometimes a regional level, but setting the incentives for these things to happen more at scale. Because the other aspect of it, like one of the closest frameworks we have to that is entrepreneurship, right? But the way entrepreneurship looks like here in Silicon Valley, only when you are inside here, you experience those dynamics, right? It's like most founders, they get too much money and they lose control of their company or are forced to pivot if the initiative doesn't produce the desired revenue, right? So founders are not given enough time to really explore fully their vision and materialize it the way they have it in their head. So that's embedded in the system. It's really short-term thinking, right? And that's why I think that big part of that is also to enable those early stage founders to create a community around the idea that they have and make that idea flourish in a more effective way. Because, you can spend, coming back to internal communication, not to deviate too much, right? You can spend millions of dollars on call messaging and on spamming employees but people are getting so saturated, especially with AI. I receive like every day, like 20 to 30 automated messages of people selling me something. But it's in the end, what makes a difference? Somebody that you informally respect telling you something. And this concept already with the Instagram influencers was captured by marketing early on. But now, as many other practices, we have to translate it to internal communications and internal management. Who are our internal influencers that, people informally respect? That's what makes such a much bigger difference rather than anything that, you're going to receive automatically via email from a person that you don't respect or you don't know.
It also feels like there's a next stage to that as well, which is not just that you've respected an influencer because you follow them on Instagram and they're doing their thing and they recommend some good stuff. But there's also a sense of as soon as they recommend something that is not right, or as soon as it's realized that either they are recommending something and they're not being clear and honest about what's being recommended, then that trust breaks really quite easily.
Exactly.
And so it's actually all got to be about trust, and it's got to be about you have to be credible. That trust needs to stay. And as soon as that trust starts to smell a bit, I can't think of a better way of saying it.
When
Sorry.
you look at the Network-First Manifesto, the first thing it says is pioneering a network-first future of work based on human connection, trust, and collaborative freedom. Trust is very important. But in a decentralized environment, trust is self-regulating. If you are a an influencer on Instagram and you recommend a scam, you know that that's gonna impact your credibility, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And speaking about scams and speaking about frauds, and one of the challenges that we face with this type of technologies is the whole blockchain space and anything related to cryptocurrency has become kind of like radioactive because of the issues with FTX and other scandals that happen sometimes here in Palo Alto. So we decided actually, like, when deploying this layer of blockchain technology that enables us to submit proposals, vote on them, we set it up in a way where we remove any monetization component, any cryptocurrency. People only interact with it via email. But many founding members are not even aware that there is blockchain involved in the regard that they just access their email, vote on the proposals, but they don't realize that in the background, there is a very sophisticated layer of blockchain technology that is creating like a self-custodian wallets that it involves tools like Privy, Snapshot, like super technical stuff. But that's the beauty of it. We are for the first time at a point in technology development where all this beautiful decentralization technology that had been traditionally used in the crypto and blockchain space can now interact with non-tech savvy users in a way that is intuitive, right? And that's, I think, one of the biggest factors.
I think it's because I did a lot of reading about Bitcoin and blockchain and stuff like that probably about a year or so ago. And, can I remember a lot of it? Probably not. But there is a sense of, if you have an interface and you have a user interface that allows people to not realize what's going on behind the scenes, like you don't need nowadays, you don't need to be able to code in order to be able to use a website, so and an app. So therefore, if there is an interface that allows you to use some of that technology, but you get what you see is what you get front end, then that it doesn't matter what it is like behind the scenes. And there will be some people who say, as you say, trust. Oh, I don't trust it because meme coins and various other things. And as you say, I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy who has gone away to prison for a very long time. And
I think it's called.
So you get all of that side of things, but it doesn't matter if that it's just the technology that you're using. I think that the trust thing is really kind of fascinating because you've got that collaborative freedom that you talked about. You've got that trust. And then what was the third thing? I can't remember the first thing that you said. It's the
human connection, trust, and collaborative freedom, right?
Yeah, those three things together
exactly
are incredibly powerful.
Meaning working on something you're passionate about with people that inspire you, having freedom over your schedule. It's that simple to explain, right? It's like anything that anybody that has worked with their own company as a founder, as a consultant, as a freelancer has experience, even despite having to fight against the whole system to really do it, right? And now another factor there that we should not underestimate is how exposed are people to tools like Slack or Discord. Because one of the challenges we're facing there is that, we are realizing that maybe you got a executive, is 50, 60, 70 years old, has been working with email all his or her life. And all of a sudden goes into Slack. So, I don't know how to set up notifications. I don't know how to, interact in the channels. I don't know how to tag people. Well, there is a bit of a learning curve there because the reality is that right now I only see two platforms that enable this community work to take place at scale: is Slack and Discord.
Yeah. Discord
being way more scalable and giving much more for free, but being more, the interface is much more for like gamers and technical.
Yeah, it's a more of a gamer's
what is Slack? But that's, we should not ignore that, right? That many people, there can be a technology gap that many people can become disconnected from that, right? And that's where, when I've been interacting with people that have set up communities of like 70,000 people, 100,000 people, they face this issue where, some of them transition from Slack to WhatsApp, and then the community diluted there. So people went to Discord very early on, but it was too techy for some people that were, but I feel like the beauty of what we're doing is that we are creating a decentralized community with people that have no idea or no previous exposure about decentralization based on prior experience. And that's the beauty of it as well, right? Again, you can see you're having fun. That's what all this is about, right? If it's something that you're having fun, you're passionate about it, then you fill all the gaps. You've had to work at 2 a.m. in the morning doing administrative work and, and sending people invites. You do it and that's it, because it's not work for you. It's something that you enjoy. That's the difference.
I think it kind of comes back to what you said earlier, which is it's about people that care about the work that they're doing.
Yes.
And that difference
That's a part of it.
between apathy, and I've seen articles recently in various different journals about the apathy at work, and how do you engage an apathetic workforce and a disengaged workforce. And actually, if you're doing work that you care about, and you can do it in a way that you care about, in a way that works for you and allows you to live your life in the way that you want to live your life, then actually there is probably, as you say, there will be more passion, there will be more collaboration. But I'm very aware that we've been talking a long time.
Yeah.
We could probably go on for another good kind of hour and a half, but possibly people don't want us to do that. They might need to go and, have a pause and go do whatever it is they need to do. So, Mike, have you got any last questions that you would like to ask Francisco? Is there anything else that we haven't asked you that you think need to know?
As you said, this could go on for another hour and it would still be interesting.
Yeah.
But, the reality is that we don't want to postpone the future of work that much. So we probably should call it a day. I think my curiosity has been sated for the moment. I'm a member of the network. I was a founding member of the Network-First Initiative. I highly recommend it for people who, care about the future of work, having a network participative and communication-based approach. So, would love to have you participate. Thank you very much for coming on board, Francisco. And anything else you need to say, Janet?
No, I think just we can put the details of how to join the initiative in the show notes so that people know how to find you. And Francisco, I know that you're probably very active on LinkedIn. I think we're connected, so people can also find you on LinkedIn if they want to know a little bit more about the stuff that you do. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Feel free to find me at LinkedIn at Francisco Marin Roofs and RU Set. And thank you both really, because you've done an amazing work spreading awareness about the initiative, both organizational network analysis and the Network-First Manifesto. And it's really inspiring to see all this flood of internal communication professionals that are learning about that. And you can see when you're passionate about something, you can talk about it for hours and it doesn't, you don't even notice it, right? So that's the energy that we want to. Thanks a lot for your help and for having me today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, Mike, we have just finished recording with Francisco. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, I think there's a lot more to AI than meets the eye, and there's a lot more to organizational network analysis. When it's paired with AI and when it's given, a level of mandate beyond just simply identifying a group of influencers and finding the gaps, which, is more sophisticated than where 90% of people are to begin with.
Yeah.
But paradoxically, the more that's available through this technology, the more attractive it's going to be to organizations and communities out there. So, even though it seems like it's making it more complex, in fact, it's making it more actionable and acceptable. So that's really exciting that, that this conversation about how do we, look at organizations and how do we look at, influence and communication in an organization as a driver of value, that's going to become a lot more obvious the more popular this becomes. So this is a potential huge win for the communication world, for internal communicators. But at the same time, we need to get our heads around this and we need to start, engaging with it, believing it, and advocating for it. What did you think, Janet?
I agree with what you said. What I thought was the most powerful piece of information for internal communication professionals or communication professionals is actually, if you think, oh, this is too big for me, this is something I can't do on my own, I don't have the budget for this, go talk to your HR team, get close to your HR team. So get an understanding of what this is, go talk to HR. If they aren't interested, go talk to IT. And actually look for who your partners within the organization are going to be, because actually it may not be you that brings this into the organization. It may be another department or team in the business, but actually you can very much ride on its skirt tails and make sure that you are a key stakeholder in anything that gets implemented, because it can really, really be useful for the stuff that you're doing. So you don't have to make this your budget. You don't have to make this your initiative. This can be a company-wide initiative, but go make friends with people who actually would have the budget to bring this in-house and get some work done.
I mean, if you're an internal comms person and you don't know who your people analytics person is in your organization, that's a really good piece of homework between now and the next podcast.
Exactly. Mike,
thank
see you
very
next time.
much. You got it.